U4 L7, The Martyrdom of Perpetua and Felicity. Note, I haven't assigned you a text to analyze recently, and I need to start assigning you text analysis so you have more practice with them before you're going to need to use that skill next semester. This assignment will be worth 10 points because it's long and trickier. Directions. You are going to read the following text about one of the most famous martyrs, Perpetua and Felicity. This text is a little bit more complicated than what you may be used to. I have chunked it up into chapters. I also put in a sidebar where I ask you questions about the text and you need to answer them in the sidebar. I've also put in brackets with orange text throughout the text to put definitions of words you may not be familiar with. Also, if you want to, as you read, feel free to highlight, underline, or make side notes about any sections that you might find helpful. It may help you for the Unit 4 summative. Preface. The noblewoman Vivia Perpetua and her slave Felicitas, the presbyter and elder of the Christian church, Saturus, and others were martyred together at Carthage, ancient Roman city in modern-day Tunisia, Africa, in 203 CE. This passio presents itself as a collection of documents. The most prominent of these is Perpetua's literary account of her own experiences, one of the very few surviving first-person narratives by women of the first millennium of Christianity. Chapter 1. The young catechumens, someone who converted to Christianity, Revocatus and his fellow servant Felicitas, Saturninus and Secundulus were apprehended, and among them also was Vivia Perpetua, respectfully born, liberally educated, a married matron, having a father and mother and two brothers, one of whom, like herself, was a catechumen, and a son of infant at the breast. She herself was about 22 years of age. From this point onward, she shall herself narrate the whole course of her martyrdom, as she left it described, by her own hand and with her own mind. While, she says, we were still with the persecutors, and my father, for the sake of his affection for me, was persisting in seeking to turn me away and to cast me down from the faith. Father, said I, do you see, let us say, this vessel laying here to be a little pitcher or something else? And he said, I see it to be so. And I replied to him, can it be called by any other name than what it is? And he said, no. Neither can I call myself anything else than what I am, a Christian. Then my father, provoked at this saying, threw himself upon me as if he would tear my eyes out, but he only distressed me, and went away, overcome by the devil's arguments. Then, in a few days after I had been without my father, I gave thanks to the Lord, and his absence became a source of consolation to me. In the same interval of a few days, we were baptized, and to me the Spirit prescribed that in the water baptism nothing else was to be sought for bodily endurance. After a few days, we are taken into the dungeon, and I was very much afraid, because I had never felt such darkness. Oh, terrible day! Oh, the fierce heat of the shock of the soldiery, because of the crowds. I was very unusually distressed by my anxiety for my infant. There were present there Tertius and Pomponius, the blessed deacons who ministered to us, and had arranged by means of a gratuity that we might be refreshed by being sent out for a few hours into a pleasanter part of the prison. Then, going out of the dungeon, all attended to their own wants. I suckled my child, which was now enfeebled with hunger. In my anxiety for it, I addressed my mother, and confronted my brother, and commended to their care my son. I was languished because I had seen them languishing on my account. Such solicitude I suffered for many days, and I obtained for my infant to remain in the dungeon with me. And forthwith I grew strong and was relieved from distress and anxiety about my infant. And the dungeon became to me as it were a palace, so that I preferred being there to being elsewhere. Then my brother said to me, "My dear sister, you are already in a position of great dignity, and are such that you may ask for a vision, and that it may be known to you whether this is to result in a passion or an escape." And I, who knew that I was privileged to converse with the Lord, whose kindness I had found to be so great, boldly promised him and said, "Tomorrow I will tell you." And I asked, and this was what was shown to me. I saw a golden ladder of marvelous height, reaching up even to heaven, and very narrow, so that persons could only ascend it one by one. And on the other side of the ladder was fixed every kind of iron weapon. There were there swords, lances, hooks, daggers, so that if any one went up carelessly, or not looking upwards, he would be torn to pieces, and his flesh would cleave to the iron weapons. And under the ladder itself was crouching a dragon of wonderful size, who lay in wait for those who ascended, and frightened them from the ascent. And Satyrus, one of the servants who was also arrested, went up first, who had subsequently delivered himself up freely on our account, not having been present at the time that we were taken prisoners. And he attained or reached the top of the ladder, and turned towards me and said to me, "Perpetua, I am waiting for you, but be careful that the dragon does not bite you." And I said, "In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, he shall not hurt me." And from under the ladder itself, as if in fear of me, he slowly lifted up his head. And as I trod upon the first step, I trod upon his head. And I went up, and I saw an immense extent of garden, and in the midst of the garden a white, hatred man sitting in the dress of a shepherd, and of a large stature, milking sheep, and standing around were many thousand white-robed ones. And he raised his head and looked upon me and said to me, "Thou and welcome, daughter." And he called me, and from the cheese as he was milking, he gave me, as if it were a little cake, which was a piece of cheese from goats. And I received it with folded hands, and I ate it, and all who stood around said, "Amen." And at the sound of their voices, I was awakened, still tasting a sweetness which I cannot describe. And I immediately related this to my brother, and we understood that it was to be a passion, and we ceased henceforth to have any hope in this world. Chapter 2. After a few days, there prevailed a report that we should be heard. And then my father came to me from the city, worn out with anxiety. He came up to me, that he might cast me down, saying, "Have pity on my daughter, on my gray hairs. Have pity on your father, if I am worthy to be called a father by you. If with these hands I have brought you up to this flower of your age, if I have preferred you to all your brothers, do not deliver me up to the scorn of men. Have regard to your brothers, have regard to your mother and your aunt. Have regard to your son, who will not be able to live after you. Lay aside your courage, and do not bring us all to destruction. For none of us will speak in freedom if you should suffer anything." These things my father, in his affection, kissing my hands and throwing himself at my feet. And with tears he called me not daughter but lady. And I grieved over the gray hairs of my father, that he alone of all my family would not rejoice over my passion. And I confronted him, saying, "On that scaffold heaven, whatever God wills shall happen. For know that we are not placed in our own power, but in that of God." And he departed from me in sorrow. Another day, while we were at dinner, we were suddenly taken away to be heard, or a public confession of their crimes. And we arrived at the town hall. At once the rumor spread through the neighborhood of the public place, and an immense number of people were gathered together. We mounted or stepped onto the platform. The rest were interrogated and confessed. The other Christians who would be held prisoner along with Perpetua confessed that they were Christians, which was a crime. Then they came to me, and my father immediately appeared with my boy, who was her son, and withdrew me from the step and said in a supplicating tone, "Have pity on your babe." And Hilarianus, the procurator, the judge who took over um, Minicuous Timon, whatever, that guy's job after he died, who had just received the power of life and death in place of proconsul, the dude who died, um, who was deceased, said, "Spare the gray hairs of your father, spare the infancy of your boy, offer sacrifice to the well being of the emperors." And I replied, "I will not do so." Hilarianus said, "Are you a Christian?" And I replied, "I am a Christian." And as my father stood there to cast me down from the faith, he was ordered by Hilarianus to be thrown down, and was beaten with rods. And my father's misfortune grieved me as if I myself had been beaten. I, so grieved for this wretched old age. The procreator then delivers judgment on all of us and condemns us to the wild beast. And we went down tearfully to the dungeon. Then, because my child had been used to receive suck from me and to stay with me in the prison, I sent Pomponius, the deacon, to my father to ask for the infant, but my father would not give it him. And even as God willed it, the child no longer desired the breast, nor did my breast cause me uneasiness, lest I should be tormented to care for my babe, and by the pain of my breast at once. All right, I'm skipping over the rest of chapter 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you want to read them, I will share them to you. But yeah, so chapter 6. No, this is now in third person point of view. It was written by Tertullian of Carthage, who was a Christian writer and was believed to have witnessed the death of Perpetua. So this is no longer in Perpetua's point of view. This is in a third person point of view now. The day of their victory shone forth, and they proceeded from the prison into the amphitheater, like a small version of the Colosseum, as if to be to an assembly, joyous and of brilliant countenances. If perchance shrinking, it was with joy and not with fear. Perpetua followed with placid look, and with step and gait as a matron of Christ, beloved of God, casting down the luster of her eyes from the gaze of all. Moreover, Felicitas, which can also be spelt Felicity. She was another Christian arrested with Perpetua and the others. At first, she thought she could not be executed with her fellow Christians since she had just given birth and needed to take care of her newborn baby. But she gave birth, so now she is happy she can be executed with the other Christians. In ancient Rome, it was illegal to execute a pregnant woman. She's the main focus of chapters 3, 4, and 5 that I skipped. Rejoicing that she had safely brought forth, so that she might fight with the wild beasts, from the blood and from the midwife to the gladiator, to wash after childbirth with a second baptism. And when they were brought to the gate, and were constrained to put on the clothing, the men that of the priest of Saturn, an important Roman god, and the women that of those who were consecrated to Creus, a Roman goddess. That noble-minded woman, Perpetua, resisted even to end with constancy, for she said, "We have come thus far of our own accord, for this reason, that our liberty might not be restrained. For this reason, we have yielded our minds, that we might not do any such thing as this. We have agreed on this with you." Injustice acknowledged the justice. The tribune yelled to their being brought as simply as they were. Perpetua sang psalms, songs and poems written in the Bible, already treading underfoot. The head of the Egyptian, referring to the Egyptian gods, Revocatus, Saturninus, and Satyrus, three other Christians who were about to be executed, uttered threatenings against the gazing people about this martyrdom. When they came within sight of Hilarianus, the judge from chapter 2, by gesture and nod, they began to say to Hilarianus, "Thou judgest us," said they, "but God will judge thee." At this, the people, referring to the people in the amphitheater watching in the audience, exasperated, frustrated, demanded that they should be tormented with scourges, whipped, as they passed along the ranks of the Venatores, Roman gladiators or warriors that would be doing the execution. And they indeed rejoiced that they should have incurred any one of their Lord's passions. But he who had said, "Ask, and ye shall receive," gave to them when they asked the death which each one had wished for. For when at any time they had been discoursing among themselves about their wish in respect of the martyrdom, Saturnius indeed had professed that he wished that he might be thrown to all the beasts, doubtless that he might wear a more glorious crown. Therefore, in the beginning of the exhibition, which is the execution event, he and Revocatus made trial, asked to be killed by of the leopard, and moreover upon the scaffold they were harassed by the bear. Saturius, however, held nothing in greater ambition than a bear, but he imagined that he would be put an end to with one bite of a leopard. Therefore, when a wild boar was supplied, it was the huntsman rather who had supplied that boar, who was gorged by the same beast and died the day after the shows. Saturius only was drawn out, and when he had been bound on the floor near to a bear, the bear would not come forth from his den. And so Satyrus, for the second time, is recalled unhurt. Moreover, for the young women, the devil prepared a very fierce cow, provided especially for the purpose contrary to custom, rivaling their sex also in that of the beast, though the women could only be killed by female animals. And so, stripped and clothed with nets, they were led forth. The populace shuddered as they saw one young woman of delicate frame, Perpetua, and others with breasts still drooping from her recent childbirth, Felicitas. So, being recalled, they were unbound. Perpetua is first led in. She was tossed and fell on her loins, and when she saw her tunic torn from her side, she drew it over her as a veil for her middle, rather mindful of her modesty than her suffering. Then she was called for again and bound up her disheveled or messy hair, for it was not becoming for a martyr to suffer with messy hair, lest she should appear to be mourning in her glory. So she rose up, and when she saw Felicitas crushed on the ground, she approached and gave her her hand and lifted her up. And both of them stood together, and the brutality of the populace, the crowd watching, being appeased, feeling sorry for Perpetua and Felicity, they were recalled to the Sanavivarian gate, the main gate of the amphitheater. When Perpetua was received or greeted by a certain one who was still a catechumen, someone who wanted to convert to Christianity but not baptized, Rusticius by name, who kept close to her, and she, as if aroused or woken up from sleep, so deeply had she been in the spirit, and in an ecstasy, a feeling of excitement, began to look around her and to say to the amazement of all, "I cannot tell when we are to be led out to that cow." And when she had heard that had already happened, she did not believe it until she had perceived certain signs of injury in her body and in her dress, and had recognized the catechumen. Afterwards, causing that catechumen and the brother to approach, she addressed them, saying, "Stand fast in faith, and love one another, all of you, and be not offended at my sufferings." The same Saturius at the other entrance exhorted or told the soldier Pudens, saying, "Assuredly, here I am, and I have promised and foretold, from up to this moment I have felt no beast, and now believe with your whole heart. Lo, I am going forth to that beast, and I shall be destroyed with one bite of the leopard." And immediately at the conclusion of the exhibition, he was thrown to the leopard, and with one bite of his he was bathed with such a quantity of blood that the people shouted out to him as he was returning the testimony of a second baptism: "Saved and washed, saved and washed." Manifestly, he, Saturius, was assuredly saved, who had been glorified in such a spectacle. Then to the soldier Pudens he said, "Farewell, and be mindful of my faith, and let not these things disturb, but confirm you." And at the same time, he asked for a little ring from his finger and returned it to him bathed in his wound, leaving to him an inherited token in the memory of his blood. And then lifeless he is cast down with the rest to be slaughtered in the usual place. And when the populace, or the crowd watching, called for them into the mist, that as the swords penetrated into their body, they might make their eyes partners in the murder, they rose up of their own accord and transferred themselves whither the people wished. But they first kissed one another, that they might consummate their martyrdom with the kiss of peace. The rest, indeed, immovable and in silence, received the sword thrust. Much more Saturius, who also had first ascended the ladder, referring to the ladder that Perpetua had in her dream that led to heaven in chapter 1, and first gave up his spirit, for he also was waiting for Perpetua. But Perpetua, that she might taste some pain, being pierced between the ribs, cried out loudly, and she herself placed the wavering right hand of the youthful gladiator to her throat. Possibly such a woman could not have been slain unless she herself had willed it, because she was feared by the impure spirit, the gladiator. O most brave and blessed martyrs, O truly called and chosen unto the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ, whom whoever magnifies and honors and adores, and surely ought to read these examples for the edification of the church, not less than the ancient ones. All right, so to wrap up this reading, answer the following questions about ACAPS. If you don't remember ACAPS, here's a link to the slideshow that explains it. Start on slide 42. So, author, who created the source? Hint, there are two people, and Alexander Roberts and James Donaldson are not the authors, they're the translators. So, you need to find the two people who are the actual authors. If you need help with that, let me know. And what do you know about these two people or their point of view? How might this affect the source's meaning? C. Context. When and where was the source created? Hint, look at the preface. Audience. For what audience was the source created? P. Purpose. For what reason was the source created? Hint, why was the author writing this? Is the author trying to persuade the reader about a topic? S. Significance. What can be learned or inferred from the source? What is the main idea? All right, let me know if you have questions. Bye.